The N1 is, and I'm quoting a comment I saw last week, unbelievably sexy, the Rolls Royce of starfighters. Chrome plating catching the light as it climbs out of the Theed Palace Hangar. Those elegant curves, the engine nacelles pushing it to 1,100 kilometers per hour in atmosphere. But here's what's been bothering me. Where's the rest of the fleet? Because Naboo isn't just one starfighter. That's the surface level read. The movies gave us the N1 and the diplomatic barges and called it a day. But dig into the video games from 2000 and 2001, the ones some of you have called goated, and you'll find bombers, police cruisers, an entire military infrastructure that the films never acknowledged. And that changes the story completely. December 18th, 2000. Factor 5, the same studio that made Rogue Squadron, releases Star Wars Episode 1, Battle for Naboo, for the Nintendo 64. Critics praise the tight, responsive controls. 15 missions spanning the entire Trade Federation occupation, multiple flyable spacecraft. And suddenly, Naboo has more than just the pretty chrome fighter that Anakin accidentally flew into a hangar bay. The NB-1S Royal Bomber, 20 meters long, nearly twice the N1's 11-meter length. 5 engine units arranged in a specific configuration, 2 primary, 2 secondary, 1 auxiliary. That's not random. That's someone thinking about thrust vectoring for atmospheric bombing runs, about the power requirements for hauling proton ordnance through contested airspace. Chromium-plated bow transitioning to those signature yellow aft panels. No hyperdrive. This thing was built for one job, dropping proton bombs on Trade Federation armor columns and getting out before the AAT gunners found their range. Which raises an interesting question. Naboo claimed they didn't have a military. The Royal Naboo Security Forces operated as a police organization under Captain Quarsh Panaka, with 3 distinct branches. The security guard handled ground-based law enforcement throughout Naboo's human settlements. The Palace Guard provided direct protection for the royal family and secured government facilities in Theed. And the Space Fighter Corps maintained aerospace patrol capabilities with approximately 1 squadron of N1 starfighters based in the Theed Palace Hangar. That's the official structure. Security, protection, patrol. But then why did they have bombers? The official classification called the NB-1S a utility craft for obstacle clearance and mining support. That's the polite fiction Naboo told itself. The reality? During the Trade Federation occupation of 32BBY, Lieutenant Gavin Sykes and other resistance pilots flew these things against hardened targets. Armor columns, fixed installations, defensive positions the N1's twin laser cannons couldn't crack. You don't build a 20-meter spacecraft with proton bomb racks because you're worried about clearing asteroids from shipping lanes. You build it because somewhere in Theed's engineering core, someone understood that pacifism has limits. Someone looked at the N1 specifications, twin laser cannons, proton torpedo launcher with a 10 torpedo capacity, and said, that's not enough firepower for what might come. And that's the tension this whole video is really about. Naboo said one thing, Naboo built another. The NX police cruiser tells the same story, maybe louder. Bigger than the N1, more heavily armed. Visually similar to the starfighter, but scaled up for a different role. Optimized for atmospheric patrol and, here's the giveaway, air superiority missions in contested zones. Air superiority. Contested zones. That's military language. That's not traffic control over Theed. That's doctrine for controlling airspace when someone's shooting back. Both ships appeared in Battle for Naboo. Both saw deployment during the resistance against Trade Federation occupation. And both represent something the movies glossed over. Naboo had hedged its bets. The pacifist philosophy was real. The belief in democratic governance and peaceful resolution was genuine. But someone in the Royal Naboo Security Forces had quietly ensured they weren't completely helpless when philosophy failed. 2 months later, LucasArts released Star Wars Starfighter in February 2001. Initially for PlayStation 2, then ported to other platforms. And this game did something Battle for Naboo didn't. It gave us perspective from outside the chrome-plated bubble. 3 interconnected pilot storylines. 3 different ships, 3 different philosophies of aerospace combat. Rhys Dallows starts as a Naboo pilot. He passes training, flying through canyon runs that test reaction time and spatial awareness, learning the N1's handling characteristics in low-altitude terrain following missions. He joins the Spacefighter Corps. His storyline shows us how Naboo trained its pilots, the emphasis on precision flying over aggressive dogfighting, the trust they placed in their Torplex flight computers, and those responsive control surfaces. The N1 handled beautifully. Quick rolls, tight turns. That Class 1.0 hyperdrive meant you could jump in and out of systems faster than almost any fighter in the sector. But it was also fragile, designed for a world that believed it would never really need to sustain combat damage. Vana Sage tells a different story entirely. She flies the Guardian Mantis, a mercenary ship built for survivability, angular where the N1 is curved, practical where Naboo is beautiful. The Guardian had a secondary fire mode the game called Sniper Mode, a long-range precision system designed for picking off targets from distances the N1 couldn't dream of engaging. That's a ship built by someone who expected fights to be dirty, who expected to take hits and keep flying. Nim, the Fioran pirate, commands the Havoc, a heavily armed bomber that makes the NB-1S look restrained. Quad laser turrets, missiles, energy bombs capable of devastating capital ship subsystems. When you play these storylines back to back, you see the contrast in engineering philosophy laid bare. The N1 is elegant, precise. The Guardian was designed by people who expected to get shot. The Havoc was designed by someone who wanted to do the shooting. The N1 was designed by people who hoped neither would ever be necessary, but installed twin laser cannons and a proton torpedo launcher just in case. That contrast matters. It tells us something about Naboo's engineering philosophy that the specifications alone can't capture. Neither Battle for Naboo nor Starfighter has been recanonized since Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012 and restructured continuity in 2014. The NB-1S bomber, the NX police cruiser, the specific missions Gavin Sykes flew, all legends now. They exist in the old continuity. They exist in your memory if you played those games as a kid, fingers cramped around an N64 controller at 2 in the morning because you couldn't quite nail the bombing run on that one mission. And they exist as proof that someone at Factor 5 and LucasArts understood something fundamental. Pacifist civilizations don't survive without hedging their bets. Now here's where the physical evidence gets interesting. Or rather, where the absence of physical evidence tells its own story. LEGO released Set 7171, the Naboo fighter, in 1999 as part of their original Star Wars launch. Chrome-painted elements attempting to capture that distinctive finish. Minifigure pilot. The N1 in brick form, one of the very first Star Wars LEGO sets ever produced. The NB-1S bomber? Nothing. The NX police cruiser? Nothing. The biggest Naboo toy wasn't a fighter at all. Hasbro's electronic Naboo Royal Starship Blockade Cruiser was one of the largest Star Wars toys ever produced for retail at the time of its release. That's the J-Type 327 diplomatic vessel. 76 meters of unarmed, fully chromium-plated elegance. 8 crew members. Luxury quarters for up to 4 passengers. A Class 1.8 hyperdrive with a Class 8 backup system. Advanced deflector shields capable of withstanding sustained fire, because someone understood you might need to run a blockade, even if you refused to shoot back. A ship designed to carry Queen Amidala to Coruscant in comfort and safety. Not to fight anybody. Ever. So the merchandise tells a different story than the games. The toys gave us the pacifist fantasy, the diplomatic barge, the elegant starfighter that's almost too pretty to risk in combat. The games gave us the combat reality, bombers and police cruisers and resistance operations that required actual military hardware. Galoob's Micro Machines Action Fleet line produced multiple N1 variants, including standard and battle-damaged versions. That battle-damage detail is telling. Someone at Galoob understood these ships would get shot. Someone understood the chrome would get scarred. Let's talk about what Naboo design language actually requires, because this matters for the question we're building toward. Chromium plating on forward hull sections. This isn't just decorative, it indicates royal service or authorization. The labor-intensive finishing process represents significant manufacturing investment, and the reflective surface provides limited sensor deflection benefits. Every N-1 in the spacefighter corps carried that chrome forward section as a mark of who they served. Yellow accent panels on aft sections and secondary surfaces. Traditional Naboo heraldic colors, consistent across military, royal, and civilian spacecraft. You can identify a Naboo ship from a kilometer away by that color scheme. Organic, flowing silhouettes, rather than angular geometries. Design philosophy that emphasizes aesthetic beauty alongside functionality. Ships that look grown or sculpted, rather than assembled from discrete components. The N1's organic curved silhouette, the crescent of its stabilizer fins, the single central engine nacelle. All of it says, we are not the Empire. We are not building weapons of terror. We are building something beautiful that happens to be capable of violence if absolutely necessary. Nubian components throughout. Theed's engineering corps maintained long-standing relationships with Nubian design houses for propulsion systems, hyperdrive units, and technical components. The reliability that let Queen Amidala trust her life to these ships came from that partnership. But here's where the engineering starts to constrain the ambition. Chromium is heavy. That beautiful plating adds significant mass compared to standard hull materials. At 11 meters, the N1 can handle it. At 20 meters, the NB-1S needs 5 engines to compensate. At 76 meters, the J-Type 327 requires serious power plants just to achieve acceptable diplomatic travel times. Those curves look beautiful, but angular surfaces deflect incoming fire more efficiently than curves at equivalent thickness. The Empire built star destroyers with those aggressive wedge shapes for a reason. Theed's shipyards historically produced small numbers of high-quality vessels. Artisanal manufacturing, custom finishing, individual attention to each spacecraft. That's not how you build a navy. That's how you build collector's items. Which brings us to the moment Naboo's pacifism finally, definitively shattered. 20 days after the Battle of Endor. 20 days after Luke Skywalker watched his father die on the second Death Star. 20 days after the Emperor, born Sheev Palpatine of Naboo, former senator from Naboo, the man who had stood in the Theed Palace throne room and accepted the gratitude of his homeworld after the Trade Federation's defeat, finally stopped breathing. Imperial Admiral Garrick Versio activates Operation Cinder. The target? Naboo. Palpatine's homeworld. The planet that raised him. The culture that elected him to represent them in the Galactic Senate. That watched him become Supreme Chancellor. That celebrated his consolidation of emergency powers as necessary wartime measures. That never suspected the Sith Lord hiding behind senatorial robes and paternal smiles. The Emperor's final order was to punish worlds he deemed insufficiently loyal. And apparently, that included the world that had the audacity to produce him. Operation Cinder deployed climate disruption arrays, satellite networks designed to manipulate atmospheric conditions, to generate storms of such catastrophic intensity that continents would become uninhabitable. Not a quick death, a slow one. Watching your farmland flood, your cities scoured by wind, your atmosphere turned against you by machines orbiting overhead. Queen Sosha Saruna governed Naboo during the crisis. The security forces scrambled. N1 starfighters launched from the Theed Palace Hangar, chrome plating catching the light as they climbed toward orbit. But they couldn't neutralize the satellite arrays alone. They didn't have the numbers. They didn't have capital ships to challenge the Imperial fleet maintaining the blockade. They needed help. Princess Leia Organa led the Alliance forces that arrived to defend Naboo. Among those pilots, Shara Bey, flying her A-Wing in defense of a planet she had no personal connection to. Shara Bey, mother of Poe Dameron, the future Resistance commander. The woman who would help Luke Skywalker recover fragments of the Force-sensitive tree from the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, flew combat missions over Naboo's atmosphere, protecting a world that had produced the Emperor himself. Think about that for a second. The rebellion's pilots, people who had lost families to the Death Star, lost friends to Imperial crackdowns, spent years fighting an empire that Naboo's own senator had created, showed up to defend Palpatine's homeworld anyway. Marvel's Shattered Empire comic series from October 2015 depicts this battle in detail. The combined Rebel and Naboo fleet engaging Imperial forces while strike teams targeted the climate disruption satellites. The desperation in Naboo's defense coordination. The strange guilt of a planet realizing that the galaxy's worst monster had walked their streets, attended their schools, absorbed their culture of peaceful democratic governance, and twisted all of it into something monstrous. The operation succeeded. The satellites were destroyed before the storms could reach catastrophic intensity. Imperial forces withdrew. Naboo survived. But here's the thing. Canon doesn't tell us what happened next. We know Naboo survived Operation Cinder. We know Queen Sosha Saruna led them through the immediate crisis. We know the Alliance pilots went home, Shara Bey eventually settling down to raise a son who would grow up to be the best pilot in the Resistance. And then, nothing. Current publications don't document Naboo's military stance in the New Republic era. We don't know if they built new ships. We don't know if they finally admitted the pacifist fantasy was over. We don't know if some engineer in Theed started sketching frigate designs, trying to figure out how to scale chromium plating to 200 meters without the mass penalties becoming impossible. The Legends continuity gave us the NB-1H Royal Star Bomber, an upgraded variant mentioned in tabletop gaming sourcebooks, enhanced payload capacity, improved defensive systems. An acknowledgement that the original NB-1S had proven its value during the Trade Federation resistance and deserved iteration. But that's Legends. And even that doesn't tell us what happens when a pacifist world finally has to become something else. This is where I need your help. What would post-Empire Naboo actually build? They've got the design language, chrome, curves, yellow panels. They've got the manufacturing base in Theed. They've got Nubian partnerships for components, though those partnerships might need to scale up significantly. They've got a population that just watched their homeworld nearly get scoured by Imperial satellites because they couldn't defend orbital space without outside help. A population that has to live with being Palpatine's planet for the rest of galactic history. The constraints are real. Chromium weight penalties at scale, curved armor inefficiencies, limited shipyard capacity, component sourcing challenges for anything bigger than a yacht. But so is the psychological pressure. You don't produce the Emperor and then pretend you can opt out of galactic security forever. You don't watch Alliance ships die protecting your atmosphere and then tell yourself you'll never need to return the favor. Does the NB-1H Royal Star Bomber become standard equipment? Do they develop a dedicated interceptor variant of the N1 for fleet defense? Do they finally commission a capital ship, accepting the engineering compromises that requires? Maybe reducing the chromium coverage, maybe accepting angular sections where armor efficiency matters more than aesthetics. Or does Naboo double down on the small, elite force philosophy? One squadron of the best pilots in the sector, flying the most advanced fighters Theed can produce, trusting quality over quantity. I don't have the answer. I'm not sure Canon has the answer yet either. But I know some of you have thought about this way more than I have. You've got theories. You've got headcanons. You've probably got detailed schematics drawn somewhere, working out the engine placement on a Naboo frigate, arguing with yourself about whether you can maintain the curved aesthetic at that scale. So here's the question. If you were designing the post-Empire Naboo Defense Force, working within Theed's aesthetic constraints and manufacturing capabilities, what would you build? Drop it in the comments. I want to see your frigates, your patrol cruisers, your arguments about whether chromium plating scales to capital ships, or whether they'd have to accept a hybrid design. The games proved Naboo had more than the movies showed us. The bombers were always there. The police cruisers were always there. The capacity for violence was always there, hiding behind classifications like utility craft and patrol vehicle. Maybe we can figure out what they built after the galaxy stopped burning. Subscribe for more stories like this.